I can't believe it's October 26th. We're wrapping up October, and we really are happy that you're here today with us at the State and Federal Programs Directors Meeting. Today on the agenda, we are going to cover on the federal side, Title I ranking and serving, the use of Title II and Title IV funds, the FPM update. We're going to talk a little bit about multi-year contracts and the required web posting. On the state side, we have LCAP update, and we're kind of in a holding pattern, but at the same time, we still have the LCAP to implement and to develop for next year. So we're still moving forward. And then some last minute reminders about our fiscal 2-day workshop that's coming up, and also our cash management deadline for those of you that have to upload your fiscal expenditures by October 31st. So, okay. As you know, this is our Canvas page. So in the chat and also on this link, if you click on the link, you can find the presentation. If you look at the icon there, go ahead and click on it, and you will be able to download the presentation. Once we have the Q&A and the recording, we will have that soon, and we will be posting it here. Then just come back here and click on those particular icons, and you can access the recording and the Q&A. As usual, please place your questions in the chat box, and we will answer any simple questions today if we can. But we always follow up with a written response in a Q&A format that we will email to you, and also we will post. And the recording that we are doing today, we will post that on our website as well. If you want to find our previous meetings, Q&As, and slides and handouts, you can follow this link. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to talk about ranking and serving. So let's first review what ranking and serving is and why it is a critical part of poverty. So high poverty schools, and so of your Title I program. So ranking is a process that districts must use annually to identify high poverty schools that are eligible for Title I services. There's several sources of allowable data to use for this process, but in most cases, the free and reduced price meal data is the most accessible and most commonly used by districts. The numbers are based on students age 5 to 17 because that is what is used for the Title I allocations. Serving is the next step. Based on that ranking, districts must determine which schools will receive the Title I funding and be served in the coming school year. And I say districts because this typically doesn't apply to charter schools, because LEAs with less than 1,000 students or single school districts are not required to rank. So the question you may have is, why are we covering it today, and why do we have to rank schools? So we know that in your winter release, you're going to have to report on the ranking. So it's important that you know about it if you're new. And for those of you that need to be reminded, as often we are too, the purpose. And so if we don't understand the reason for the ranking, we find that it leads to a lot of questions that we get, as well as some misunderstandings. So our purpose today is to make sure that we're all grounded in the purpose of ranking and serving and what is ranking and serving specifically. So the purpose of ranking is to ensure that the Title I funds go to the schools with the highest percentage of low-income students. And all the rules that are part of the ranking and serving push you in that direction. And this is why you will find all the rules around ranking that support this outcome. So what numbers are used for ranking? Like I said before, most districts will use the free and reduced price meal numbers taken from the CalPADs using the 5 through 17 count report. Because current year CalPADS numbers are not reported until October each year, the prior year's CalPADS numbers which have been certified should be used. In the WinnerCon app, CDE pre-populates these numbers when you are reporting the results of your ranking. So keep in mind that if you use other numbers for ranking, you will need to change the pre-populated numbers to the data that you are using, and you will need to maintain this documentation. We also recommend not changing these numbers because unless there is an extenuating circumstance, such as you're going to have to change the numbers. Changing the numbers can impact a school's eligibility and will disrupt school programs after they have started the school year. Also, changes in the school eligibility will impact the compliance of that school. So, for example, re-ranking with the new numbers during that year could mean that a school that was originally identified could fall out of ranking. And so you can see all the problems that could arise if you change the numbers to current numbers. So you might ask yourself, would you pull the funding mid-year? How will you account for the money that has already been spent at that school if it now is no longer a Title I school? How would you account for services that were or weren't provided? Will this put you over the 15% threshold for carryover? And then ultimately, what message does this send to your schools about the planning for your Title I programs? So let's review the rules for ranking and serving. The first one is schools have to be ranked based on poverty percentages using the same data for all schools. So you can't use different measures for, say, one grade level versus another grade level. The same data must be used for all the schools in this ranking process. The second is all schools with the free and reduced price meals or low-income percentages that are at or above the district average of poverty are eligible for funding. And remember, just because a school is eligible doesn't necessarily mean you must serve them. It's a district decision where you are going to have that cut point and where you're going to serve, which schools you're going to serve. The third rule is that the schools you have to serve are schools that have more than 75% poverty. These schools must be served before serving other eligible schools. Again, the funding must be given to the highest poverty schools. Then there was an option that came in with ESSA, and this is where secondary schools that have at least 50% poverty may be served prior to serving the other schools. The next rule is if funding remains after the funding those particular schools, then all the other eligible schools must be ranked in order of poverty. Schools may be ranked district-wide or by grade span. And so district-wide means you put all your schools in order and rank them all in order of poverty. If you rank them by grade span means that you can rank them by elementary, middle, high school, and then you can serve within that grade span first. So, but remember, you must serve all your schools over 75 first, and then after that, you can rank your district-wide all the rest of the schools, or look by grade span and decide which grade span will you serve first. And then if you have money left over, you can decide to include another additional grade span. But the money rules direct the rules direct the money to the highest poverty schools first. As a reminder, districts are not required to fund all eligible schools, which this leads to the next rule. Funding for each funded school must be sufficient to provide a program of sufficient size, scope, and quality to ensure the likelihood of success in closing achievement gaps. If you remember in the past, Bonnie used to always have that salt shaker with the X over it saying, no, you shouldn't sprinkle your funds, because really, how can you provide a quality, sufficient, program for those students to close the achievement gap? And then if you serve any schools that are below 35% poverty, then you have to fund all your eligible schools at 125% of the total allocation. So how this translates is you would need to reduce the amount for administrative and indirect cost in order to fund the eligible schools at 125%. So again, a lot of rules to follow, but it's all to direct the money towards the highest needs of students. There are some exceptions that can be applied. So the first exception is the grandfather option. If you have an eligible school that was funded in the prior year and now is ineligible, you may fund them for one additional year, but again, just for 1 year only. You can carry them for additional year to help them draw down their Title I program. Another exception is if a school is below the district poverty average and at or above the 35% poverty percentage, you may serve that school as long as all schools with higher poverty have been served. And then there is a feeder pattern exception, and this is for secondary and middle schools. If you determine that you will get more accurate poverty data by using data from the feeder schools, you may use this method to determine the poverty percentage. So funding requirements. Again, 85% of the district's Title I allocation must be used at the Title I schools for direct services for students. Remember, direct services are services where the student is the primary recipient of these services. And this has been described to also include parent engagement activities as well as professional learning activities. LEAs may reserve funds for district operated activities, but reserved funds must be for direct services and can only be used at Title I schools. Sometimes districts think that this is district-wide funds, and it's not. This is for Title I services, direct services to students, but at the Title I schools only. And then also the per pupil amount, usually called the PPA for school allocations, may vary by school, but only if the PPA for higher poverty schools is higher than the PPA for lower poverty schools. So those are some exceptions. We often get some confusion between 35 and 40%. And I have to admit, sometimes I would get confused too. So here it is in writing. The 35% applies to the minimum poverty level for serving a school without triggering the exception rule for schools below the district average and requiring that 125% funding requirement. 40% is the minimum poverty level for a school to implement a school-wide program without a waiver. Anything below that requires a waiver to operate a school-wide program. So when should you rank? We always recommend starting this process early. Ranking decisions can begin in the spring after your October CalPADS numbers have been certified. Ranking should take place prior to the beginning of the school year so that your schools can be informed of their identification as a Title I school, having a current board-approved school plan in place, and beginning services for students at the beginning of the year. So even though the ranking is reported in the winter release, which should be coming out shortly, why should you rank early? Here's some reasons. Because if you identify any schools that become ineligible for funding, you can decide whether you want to fund them for the next year or whether you'd like to use that grandfather reason to add them for an additional year. Also, you might notice that you have newly identified eligible schools, and you can decide if you're going to be funding them. Also, to determine district-wide or grade span ranking. Sometimes manipulating that or figuring out what is better, you need to do that ahead of time. And then also to make sure that school site councils are in place and that school plans will be revised and approved prior to the beginning of the school year. Or if your timeline is different than that, when it's due based on your district schedule. And so again, you want to reflect those current needs and the funding amounts And at this time, you can use the preliminary numbers. So again, there's just so much planning that's needed to implement the Title I program. You don't want to wait till you have to report it in the winter release of the CONAP. You want to do it as soon as possible because you can. So here's some questions you might consider about your current ranking process in light of the intended purpose of Title I. Are you funding all eligible schools? If so, do you know why? If you're not, well, what criteria do you use to determine a cut point? Are you just sprinkling a little money to each school? What's your criteria and how do you determine that? Also, do you allocate based on the same PPA for all schools? You might ask yourself, is this the best use of funds to target your most needy populations? Also, when determining the PPA and the number of schools identified, do you take into consideration whether the amount of funds is adequate in order to support a program of sufficient size, scope, and quality? Will this have the likelihood of success in closing any achievement gaps? And so when you are ranking schools and notifying the schools of their estimated funding, how does this impact the school planning? How does this impact any carryover? So again, this is why it's important to do your ranking ahead of time in the spring so you can plan ahead for the future, the coming year. Finally, we have some bottom line questions for you to consider about whose needs are being met by your ranking decisions, students or the adults in the system. Are you ensuring that your highest poverty schools are receiving adequate funding to implement effective programs to really close the achievement gap? Are you notifying schools in a timely manner to allow them to develop a thoughtful, comprehensive plan? Then you are likely focusing on student needs if you've answered, yes, you're doing this. If you're just sprinkling funds into as many schools as possible or allowing them to operate school-wide regardless of the poverty level or whether the school is actually understanding and ready to implement a school-wide program. If you answered, yes to that, if you haven't notified them, you're most likely focusing on the adult need. And so again, it really begs the question with the title funds, it's, do you see it as a pot of money or are you implementing a Title I program for your students? And now I will pass it on to Helen.
Thank you, Adrienne. Before we get into the use of Title II funds, let's first discuss the purpose of Title II. The purpose of Title II Part A is to increase student achievement consistent with challenging academic standards, improve the quality and effectiveness, and increase the number of teachers, principals, and other school leaders who are effective in improving student academic achievement, and provide low-income and minority students with greater access to effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders. In order to maximize Title II, LEAs must engage in meaningful consultations with a broad range of educational partners, including teachers, principals, families, and other community partners. And once the needs have been identified, LEAs, along with their educational partners, through consultation, determine the approach most likely to be effective. Remember that the intent and the purpose of Title II is to ensure that low-income families and minority students have greater access to effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders. And when determining which of the many allowable Title II strategies and activities will have the highest impact, U.S. Department of Ed guidance suggests that LEAs use 5-step framework, as shown here, the link framework, and the link to the guidance is also on this slide. And let's take a quick look at this framework, the 5-step process. The first step is when determining how to use Title II, start with the local needs. LEAs must engage in meaningful consultation with broad range of educational partners and should examine the relevant data to understand students and educators' most pressing needs, including potential root causes of those needs given in the local context. And remember, interviews, focus groups, and surveys may also provide insights to these local needs. Second, once needs have been identified, LEAs, along with educational partners through consultations, need to determine the approaches that are most likely to be effective. And thirdly, LEAs are to develop a robust implementation plan. This includes a logic model that demonstrates a theory of action by connecting the intervention to the expected outcomes with well-defined measurable goals. Next, provide adequate resources so implementation is well supported. And finally, of course, LEA should gather information regularly to examine the effectiveness of strategies for next steps. And remember, using this framework will help LEAs to maximize their Title II funds. Here are some authorized activities listed in ESEA Section 2103 for Title II. The LEA can then determine what activities Title II will support their goals and strategies based on their needs assessment. And again, you'll notice that child abuse training is listed here, but remember, in California, this is a legal requirement at the state level, and using Title II funds may be supplanting. In addition, CDE has indicated that if you're using Title II funds or plan to use to support class size reduction, please contact their office for consultation. CDE has condensed 16 authorized uses of funds into 4 main themes into the areas of professional learning, recruitment and retention, effective teaching strategies, and understanding and supporting the whole child. We will highlight and provide examples of some common and impactful activities funded with Title II and Part A during this session. First, around the area of professional learning, remember the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, defines professional development as activities that are sustained, intensive, collaborative, job-embedded, and data-driven, rather than a PD that stands alone and does not connect to a larger school-wide or individualized plan. And within PDs, there are additional categories: instructional coaching, professional learning communities, principal and teacher leadership, and induction and mentoring. First, effective pre-service and in-service principal training programs should be aligned to Capsule for educational leaders, and they may include high-quality mentoring and coaching, peer observations, visits to other schools, and guided walkthroughs of schools to look at practices in the classroom and consider how to improve teaching and learning. The use of teacher leaders rather than vendors to perform coaching services related to instruction and curriculum to foster more cohesive staff climate and culture while building LEA's capacity to increase student learning and student achievement. And high-quality mentoring and induction programs provide new teachers with PDs, research-based resources, and formative assessment tools for these beginning teachers, mentors, and other school leaders. And I also want to take this time to quickly discuss ESSA's definition of the term school leader. Remember, this means a principal, assistant principal, or other individual who is an employee or officer at an elementary or secondary school and responsible for daily instructional leadership and managerial operation in an elementary or secondary school setting. Other positions that do not meet ESSA's definition of school leader includes a counselor, translator, or activity directors. Some professional development activities that are eligible under Title II are those PDs that are based on a needs assessment, part of the Title II plan, and meets the federal definition of professional development. Teachers can receive stipends for time outside normal schedule hours to participate in professional learning, or lead or participate in training that improve content knowledge or classroom practice. Professional learning community meetings that are focused on PD or staff outside of normal contract hours, and increase student attendance and engagement. PD's activities can include learning activities for culturally diverse classrooms. And remember, substitutes so teachers can attend PDs that meets the ESSA definition of PD, and substitutes so that teachers can observe other teachers. Listed on this slide are some activities that are not eligible under Title II. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but rather a few examples to help clarify some questions that CDE has received. This includes training required at schools that are mandated, such as child abuse reporting, workshop, or conferences that are not related to sustainable series of PD activities, or paying staff with Title II funds to attend PD activities during contract hours, or things with textbook adoption or furnishing of training rooms. Again, the following activities are not eligible under Title II, and the ones with asterisks may never be charged to Title II, and those are food outside of travel reimbursement, equipment, and student materials. Moving on to recruitment and retention. The uses of funds from Title II that are grouped under recruitment and retention include recruiting and retaining effective teachers, recruiting individuals from other fields, evaluation and support systems, and feedback mechanism to improve working conditions. Let's review a few recruitment activities that are allowable. Remember, all of these activities must be based on a needs assessment. An example may include advertising and job fairs that are above and beyond what the LEA is currently doing. Please also remember that advertising and job fairs charged to Title II must be only for teachers, principals, and other school leaders. Other school leaders, again, are those who directly impact instruction. Counselors are not considered other school leaders under this definition. Retention activities allowable under Title II also include bonuses, differential pay, cost of state tests for a teacher to add a licensure endorsement. Some recruitment activities that are not allowable under Title II for recruitment include supplanting state funds that the LEA has already received for recruiting, fees or other costs associated with acquiring a new home, and income taxes paid by an employee related to reimbursed relocation costs. We have also listed some retention activities that are not allowable for private schools or staff members that are not supported by Title II, such as cost of living or collective bargaining increases. Okay, so a pop quiz. Here's a scenario. Sunnyside School District is facing a critical situation where they need to ensure that the teachers are adequately trained to administer the LCAP. This training is essential to meet the required 95% student participation in the LCAP, and they're considering using Title II funds to address this issue. Is this allowable with Title II funds? Put your answer in the chat. See some answers coming in. A for yes, B for no. Yes, I see lots of answers coming in, and the answer is no. This is not allowed because LPAC is a mandated testing, and the training around administrator of the LPAC is a requirement. Let's take a look at how Title II can support effective teaching strategies. The effective teaching strategies listed under Title II allowable uses of funds include effective teaching of English language learning, effective teaching of students with disabilities, increased knowledge and ability to teach early childhood, high quality instruction of science, technology, engineering, and math, implementation of formative assessments, instructional services provided by libraries, and effectively integrating technology into curriculum and instruction. And the last category is understanding and supporting the whole child. The Title II funds, uses of funds grouped under this theme are career readiness education, training to recognize and prevent sexual abuse, instructional practices for gifted and talented students, supporting students affected by trauma and/or mental illness, and school conditions for student learning. So now that we've reviewed the 4 themes, these funds under Title II must be used, remember, to supplement and not supplant. The LEAs may not use Title II funds to pay for activities that in the absence of these funds will be provided with state or local funds. And to determine if the cost is supplanting, ask the following questions. Are the Title II funds being used to provide services that the LEA was required to make available under other federal, state, or local laws? For example, were the funds used to support ELD or child abuse training? Are the Title II Part A funds being used to provide services that the LEA provided with non-federal funds in prior years? For example, was a position or were consultation services paid from another source from the previous year? If the answer to these questions is yes, then the use of funds is not supplementary to core services required by other federal, state, or local laws. And as we conclude this section, please consider these questions in mind as your LEA evaluates activities under Title II. Is this reasonable and necessary? Is this required? How would this be paid for in the absence of Title II funds? Which funding source paid for this last year? Which areas of needs were identified in the needs assessment at the district or at the school level? How can the district maximize funding? Is this the best use of these funds? How is the district coordinating programs? And finally, here are some important reminders again. And remember that the activities must be aligned to the needs assessment, must be reasonable, allowable, and necessary, and they may not supplant. Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Debbie to continue with Title IV.
Thanks, Helen. Good morning, everyone. So we're going to go over Title IV, Part A, which is Student Support and Academic Achievement, or SSAE program. They're federal funds to support improvement of students' academic achievement by increasing LEAs and school agencies and local communities' capacity. So Title IV, Part A, in their LEA allocations are given to all schools. All LEAs will receive at minimum a $10,000 allocation. LEAs have the discretion on how to carry over, how carryover is reallocated, and we'll talk about that a little, a few slides down. All remaining funds not expended or obligated by September 30th of the following year are going to be returned to California Department of Education. So you need to, the expectation is that the funds are used in the year that they are given. And fiscal reporting is completed through the consolidated application. Next slide. The purpose of Title IV Part A is to strengthen student academic achievement by improving access to a well-rounded education, school conditions of learning, and use of technology. Next slide. Any school that receives a Title IV Part A, so all of them need to utilize a needs assessment in order for the funds to be spent. And as just like with Title II and with all of our others, you need to engage educational partners and discuss the needs of the school and looking at data. This is required when an LEA is allocated $30,000 or more, and it must be completed prior to receiving the LEA allocation, and it needs to be completed at least once every 3 years. Next slide. So with our other title monies, if you are you need to do consultation through equitable services needs assessment, and with your educational partners in private schools, you may discuss the use of Title IV, and private schools may elect to participate and receive these funds. Next slide. The use of the funds. Now, there are requirements. At least 20% of the funds should go to support one or more well-rounded educational activity. 20% of funds should be used to support one or more safe and healthy student activity. And then a portion of the funds could be used to support one or more effective use of technology activity. And this is for LEAs that, this is a requirement, all three of these for LEAs that receive $30,000 or more. For those LEAs that receive less than $30,000, they need to select one of these to expend their funds. Now, the links here on the slide provide examples and links to the CDE guidance on the more specific questions on what is allowable for using these funds. Next slide. And using your funds on capital expenditures, it is allowed, and so you would use it on property with a useful life of more than 1 year and an acquisition cost that's equal or exceeds the federal per unit capitalization threshold of $5,000. So here are some examples of what on the slide, what you might be using Title IV funds for and what the activity area is. So if you were going to do some upgrades to your performing arts center, that would be considered under well-rounded education. And the CDE will give you, you have to put in a proposal with the $5,000 or more. You're going to have to submit a proposal, and the information to contact the CDE office, Title IV, is there on the slide, because you need to follow the protocol for this. Next slide. And again, as I said earlier, the funds are, the expectation is that you receive the funds in the school year, you would expend them on those students. The students who generated the funds should receive the fruits of those funds, if you will. So the fiscal year 2021, the funds would expire, they just expired September 30th, 2023. So you see that you have 1 year to use them and 1 year for carryover. Next slide. And the federal funds, of course, federal funds are monitored under federal program monitoring, and discussed transferability earlier, slightly touched on it. The only two funds, the title funds, where you can transfer money to another fund would be Title II and Title IV. You can transfer into Title I or Title III. You can move the money from there to there. And you cannot move out of Title I or Title III. You can move into them, but not out of them. So if you elect to transfer money out, you can see here there's different ways that's reviewed. Full review is you kept all of your money. Full transfer is if you've moved all of your money out. So you can see the monitoring tools that are used, and then partial transfer. So if you've moved the money and transferred it, you would make sure that you are minding these different FPM instruments. Okay, and talking about FPM, leading right into Adrienne again.
Hi, thank you. So today we want to focus on the Title I program instrument, which is called the Compensatory Education Instrument. We hope that everyone has had an opportunity to review the 23-24 instruments that CDE has posted, but we also want to make sure that you have specifically looked at the compensatory education instrument for the 23-24 school year. And if you did, you will have noticed that there's a change from last year's instrument. As you can see here, last year's instrument had 20 items, and this year, 1 new item has been added. And as you can see in the yellow highlight, it's CE7 discipline practices. If you haven't had a chance to look at this year's instrument, we strongly encourage you to take a look. CE7 is about 10 pages long, and now the instrument is 50 pages long in totality. There's a lot of detailed information in the instrument, and we want to bring your attention today to this change. We've provided a compensatory instrument guide for your convenience to use. And what it is it's kind of a checklist of all the required evidence. Also, too, we've provided the CDE presentation on discipline practices. If you attended the meeting last December 2022, you probably have it, but we want to bring it to the forefront and provide it for you today as well. And in that, you can see the slides that CDE covered about the this new item that's been added. Within all those 10 pages, really, the purpose of CE7 discipline practices is to address the LEA's efforts in reducing the overuse of discipline practices that remove students from the classroom. Because again, if students aren't in the class, then the ripple effect and the consequences are higher rates of, lower student achievement and chronic absenteeism and such. So, and higher suspension rates. So again, this is an effort to reduce the overuse of discipline practices. So if we take a look at the FPM instrument itself, there are 7 components to the overall requirement. It specifically addresses the requirements for involuntary transfers to continuation schools. It looks at the requirements for voluntary transfers to continuation schools. It looks at your practices and the requirements for pupil suspensions by teachers and by principals and superintendents for that matter. Also, the next one, 7.4, looks at the requirements for pupil expulsions at your schools and the transfers, suspensions, and expulsions pertaining to foster youth. And then also suspensions and expulsions in charter schools. And then 7.7 specifically addresses the requirement to translate any of these documents to parents and guardians whose language is other than English. So again, all of this is required, and it is a lengthy item in the CE instrument. And if you look at the evidence that's being requested, you will be asked, if you're a charter school, to upload your charter school petition. You're going to be asked to show your continuation school transfer policies, specifically on involuntary transfers and voluntary transfers. Also, expulsions, rules, and regulations will need to be uploaded, as well as your suspension policies. So now what? Our questions to you are, did you know that there was an additional CE7 discipline practice policies in the CE instrument? Our second question is, have you read it? Have you read all those pages, and are you understanding the requirements? And do you know what you need to do and look in yours? So have you read your own discipline practice policies? What do your own policies say? Would you be compliant? And do you need to make any revisions to the discipline practice policies? As you know, when you make policy changes, it does take months of board meetings, so you don't want to wait to the last minute. It's not something that you can revise in your office and be done with it. This has to go through the formal process of updating your board policies and such. So again, do you know your system? Do you know your process? Do you know who to contact? And again, the ultimate question is, today, would you be compliant? Or are there areas that you need to add to your calendar and your to-do list to make sure that your schools and your districts are in compliance with this new item of discipline practices? And thank you. So now I will turn it over to Anita.
Anita, I was muted. Okay, good morning, everyone. In this next section, we're going to take a look at multi-year contracts and the concerns one often encounters when using federal funds to pay for them. So let's begin with a scenario that might be a familiar one. You have a software program designed to identify students' math and reading areas of need, provide targeted support for the students, and determine growth that offers you a price for a one-year license. Let's just say that that price is $5,000 for the school year. If you purchase a 2-year contract, the software company offers you a 10% discount for a total price of $9,000. But the company has a great deal. If you purchase a 4-year contract, you'll get 4 years for the price of 3, a 25% discount. That's a $5,000 savings. Who wouldn't want to save money? So you prepare the purchase request and you need to decide which funds you will be using to pay for that contract. And about this time in the process, you may be wondering if it's allowable to use federal funds to purchase a multi-year contract. It's always a good idea to give that decision pause, to stop and think before you hit the submit button. And truth be told, this is a question that is often asked by LEAs. And we've checked with CDE and the Compensatory Education Compliance Office to make certain that we are providing you with the correct information. And based on that collaborative conversation held between CDE's fiscal and the Comp Ed monitoring offices, it has been determined that using federal program funds to purchase a multi-year contract is not an allowable practice based on program implications. So to begin, federal program funds have statutory program requirements and regulations that govern the timing, the use of funds, and evaluation of effectiveness. And all of these rules can be found in the second section of the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR Part 200. In the Code of Federal Regulations, you'll see that first, federal funds usually have a limited period of availability. Next, the funds most often are awarded and appropriated annually to benefit the current year's program. And third, programs under ESSA require an annual evaluation of effectiveness. And so the federal program funds have statutory program requirements and regulations that essentially restrict the use of these funds for prepaid contracts over multiple years. There are probably 2 camps of federal funds that you're probably thinking about right now. We have ESSER and we have ESSA funds. And although there are similarities between the 2 types of funds, there are a few distinctions that are important to note. First, ESSER funds allowed for a broad range of activities and covered multiple years. In addition, due to the reason these funds came into existence, following the coronavirus national emergencies, LEAs could go back to March 2020 to cover expenses. And so thus a multi-year contract or prepaid expenditures could be covered with ESSER federal dollars so long as the contract was inclusive of the period of availability for each of the 3 ESSER grants, respective of their own individual timeframe. On the other hand, for ESSA federal funds, the rules are different. These program funds can only be used for the current fiscal year. And in addition, legal assurances were signed for these funds, which require an annual evaluation of programs to ensure they are not of low effectiveness. And for schools with Title I programs, an update or revision to the SIPSA might be necessary based on the annual review of the program. So just imagine for a second, if you were locked into a multi-year contract for a program paid out of ESSA federal funds that turned out to be ineffective after your annual evaluation. It would be unjustifiable and non-compliant to have spent money on something that did not meet the required need. And so the old adage rings true once again: today's money for today's child. Nevertheless, there are times when you do find yourself that you need to prepay expenditures in the current fiscal year for something that you will actualize in the subsequent year. And this is where the California School Accounting Manual, affectionately known as CSAM, comes into play. So one example is the payment of a registration fee for a teacher to attend a conference that will be held in the next fiscal year. But in order to reserve the teacher's spot, payment must be made in May, even though the teacher won't be attending the conference until November of the following fiscal year. In this case, the charge is made to a prepaid account in the current fiscal year, to be expensed in the following year when the teacher attends the conference. The prepayment should be recorded in an unrestricted resource and then later expended against the categorical program or the federal fund at the time that the conference is attended. Another example where CSAM procedure 420 may be implemented is if a multi-year contract is realized and restricted dollars will be used, then a schedule of prepaid expenditures must be maintained. And here we see that the total cost of a multi-year contract in this example for an identified service or program is $3,000. The schedule portions out the first year and the remaining amount in the subsequent years is applicable. So $1,000 in year one, $1,000 in year two, $1,000 in year three. Restricted funds may pay for the first year, which in this example is $1,000. Other funds pay for the remainder of that total. If it is determined after an annual evaluation that in the following year it is still appropriate to use ESSA categorical program funds, then this specific accounting mechanism found in CSAM procedure 420 must be used to ensure that the correct amounts are charged for the year in which the benefit is received. First, it is important that in this accounting procedure for an LEA, the following things occur. First, the schedule is retained for reference at the time of future year's charge-off to ensure that the correct amounts are being charged to each succeeding year in which the benefit is received. And second, charging off the portion applicable to a new year at the beginning of the year requires a journal entry to be made, and with the debit charged to the appropriate expenditure account and the credit applied to a prepaid expenditure. This entry should be one of the first entries made. And although the LEA's fiscal and accounting department will be the most knowledgeable about CSAM procedures and the specifics of it all, it is important to know that specific accounting procedures must be followed for multi-year contracts and for prepaid expenditures. And equally important is to remember that when using federal restricted dollars, the amount charged to the program is in the same year in which students are benefiting. And so some additional considerations when dealing with contracts using federal funds to pay for them. Internal controls. How does the LEA ensure that the contract is fulfilled and that services are provided as described in the contract? Who checks for that? Is the contract specific with deliverables, and does it provide remedies if services are not provided as described? Procurement procedures. How will your LEA maintain oversight to ensure that contractors perform in accordance with the terms and conditions of their contract or purchase orders? Were correct procurement procedures followed based on contract amount? And remember that procurement procedures tend to vary based on the amount of money being spent on the contract. The more money, the more procedures. Allowability. There are many types of funds with a specific allowable uses. So who is double checking that a program, a service, or an expense being charged to a fund is allowable? Were the procedures, the checks and balances within a district followed? Reasonable and necessary. Is the expense reasonable and necessary for the implementation of the grant? And one more reminder about ESSER. In this case, really, we only have ESSER 3 left. Is the associated action necessary to prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID? And these are just some of the considerations you may wish to ponder and reflect upon. Okay, so now Rachel will close out the federal portion of this meeting with required web postings.
Thank you, Anita. Good morning, everyone. So as Anita mentioned, in this section, we just have a few reminders regarding required web postings. So as you may know, there are a number of plans, policies, and other documents that LEAs are required to post on their website based on state and or federal laws. And in some instances, there are items required to be posted on school websites as well. And so we know that this can be challenging for LEAs because there's not really one central place where you can go to find out everything that's required to be posted on your website. So to support LEAs with this requirement, we created this web postings resource chart that we periodically review and update. And on the slide, you can see a few screenshots. However, the full document is available with our materials on our Canvas page. And so one important thing to keep in mind is that this resource highlights just some of the required web postings, and it's by no means inclusive of all federal or state posting requirements. So the resource chart includes a brief description of the posting requirement, as well as a link to the specific education code or other reference where you can find more information. Additionally, several of these posting requirements are monitored through the Federal Program Monitoring or FPM process. So for those items, we've added the applicable FPM instrument item numbers for your reference. And in looking at this resource, you'll notice that several of the required web postings are monitored through the Education Equity Program instrument. Lastly, we also highlighted key language from statute that specifies how the information needs to be posted on the LEA's website. So for example, you'll notice for some items, it indicates that the item must be publicly posted on the LEA's website, whereas other items might indicate that it needs to be prominently posted on the homepage. Or some items must be posted in a prominent and conspicuous location on the website that's easily accessible to parents, guardians, and pupils. So it's really important to keep in mind the language in statute regarding these required web postings. So there are a number of required web postings that are included in this resource document. And it's a 7-page long document, so we're not going to go through each item, but rather provide some reminders regarding just the ones that are listed on this slide. So as you may know, LEAs are required to post the LCAP on its webpage. And so the language in statute specifies that it must be prominently posted on the homepage of the internet website. And this applies to school districts, charter schools, as well as county offices. For school districts, it's also important to note that the county-approved LCAP must be posted. Additionally, CDE has clarified that all past approved LCAPs must be posted on the webpage per statute. And then another important thing to remember is that school districts must prominently post on their website all LCAPs submitted by charter schools that were authorized by that school district. The Safe Return to In-Person and Continuity of Services Plan is another plan that's required to be posted on the LEA's website for those LEAs that received ESSER III funds. And for this plan, LEAs were required to review and, as appropriate, revise the plan at least every 6 months until September 30th, 2023. Although the September 30th deadline has passed and LEAs are no longer required to review and revise this plan, please keep in mind that it should still be posted on your website as the grant period has not ended for these funds. Additionally, if you're selected for a federal stimulus monitoring review through the FPM process, this is something that will be reviewed. LEAs are also required to post information related to the LEA liaison for homeless children and youth and unaccompanied youth. And so this includes a list of the liaisons in the LEA, as well as their contact information, and also specific information on homelessness, including information regarding the educational rights and resources available to persons experiencing homelessness. Additionally, schools are required to post the contact information for the liaison on the school's website, if the school has a website. The Sex Equity and Education Act requires each public elementary and secondary school in the state, including charter schools, that offer competitive athletics to make specific information publicly available on the school's website at the end of the school year. The Sex Equity and Education Act also requires LEAs and schools to post Title IX information in a prominent and conspicuous location on their website. And this includes the name and contact information of the Title IX coordinator, the rights of students and the public, and the responsibilities of the public school, school district, county office of education, or charter school under Title IX, and how to file a complaint under Title IX. There are also a number of items required to be posted on the LEA's website related to bullying and harassment prevention under Education Code 234.6b. And so statute specifies that these items must be readily accessible in a prominent location on the LEA's website in a manner that is easily accessible to parents or guardians and pupils. And so per this education code, there are a number of items that must be posted. And so you can see on the slide in the screenshot of the document that there's a lot of items posted under that education code. And so this includes the LEA's policy on suicide prevention in grades 7 through 12. Also the LEA's written policy on sexual harassment as it pertains to pupils. Another example is the LEA's anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, and anti-intimidation and anti-bullying policies, as well as the LEA's anti-cyberbullying procedures. And so those are just a few of them that are noted. We also wanted to put on your radar that there will be some web postings required for the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant Funds and the Proposition 28 Arts and Music in Schools. For the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant Funds, LEAs are required to submit expenditure reports to the CDE by December 15th each year, beginning next year in 2024 through 2029. And so these completed expenditure reports will need to be made publicly available on the LEA's website. So again, that won't apply until next year in 2024. For Proposition 28 Arts and Music in Schools funds, LEAs are required to annually submit and post on the LEA's website a board or body approved report that details the types of arts education programs funded, the number of full-time equivalent teachers, classified personnel, and teaching aides, the number of students served, and the number of school sites providing arts education programs with Proposition 28 funds. And so again, keep in mind that both of these items or both of these reports will need to be posted in the future. So just wanted to put that on your radar. So as previously mentioned, several of the required web postings are monitored through the FPM process. And we just wanted to show you what an evidence request would look like for one of these items. So the Education Equity Program Instrument monitors the Title IX requirements, as well as the bullying and harassment prevention information that's required under Education Code 234.6b. And so one of the items that is reviewed is the LEA's written policy on sexual harassment as it pertains to students. So per the Education Code, this policy must be readily accessible in a prominent location on the LEA's website in a manner that is easily accessible to parents, guardians, and students. And so on the left side of the slide, you can see a screenshot of the program instrument. And on the right side, we've included a screenshot of the evidence request from the program instrument. So for this item, an LEA would need to provide a screenshot of the LEA's homepage to landing page and show the click path to the posted policy. So the FPM reviewer would be looking to see that this item is readily accessible and in a prominent location. And as indicated in the evidence request screenshot, a drop-down menu would not be considered a prominent location. So again, it's important to review the specific law for the items required to be posted to ensure that you're meeting the requirement. And then lastly, I would just like to note again that the web postings resource, again, it just highlights some of the required web postings, and it's not an exhaustive list. And so that concludes this section. So I will now turn it over to Jeannie.
Thank you, Rachel, and good morning, everyone. We can go to the next slide for the LCAP update. Our LCAP section today is going to address the requirements for the new mid-year report on the current year LCAP, as well as the revised local indicator tool for State Priority 6. So, per Senate Bill 114, a new requirement for a mid-year report was added to the Education Code requirements that outline what must occur prior to the governing body of a charter school or the governing board of a school district or county office of education adopting the local control and accountability plan. So beginning in the 23-24 school year, each LEA must present a report to their governing authority on the annual update to the LCAP and the local control funding formula budget overview for parents. Per statute, this report must be presented at a regularly scheduled meeting of the governing authority and needs to include the 2 items included on the screen: all available mid-year outcome data related to metrics identified in the current year's LCAP, and all available mid-year expenditure and implementation data on all actions in the current year's LCAP. This report must be presented at a regularly scheduled meeting before February 28th of each year. Next slide, please. So we've received some questions from LEAs about the requirements for the mid-year presentation that you may be wondering about as well. The statute does not require that the presentation be included in the LCAP that is submitted for adoption, and it does not require county oversight or approval of the LEA's presentation. Additionally, it's important to note, LEAs have the flexibility to determine the format for their presentation, and there is not a required template. We do suggest that LEAs maintain documentation of their presentation in the minutes of their public meeting. Several of the requirements outlined in the statute that address what must occur prior to the governing authority adopting the LCAP are included in the audit guide. So it is possible this requirement will also be added to the audit review. What is important here is really to consider in planning the presentation is how the LEA will provide information that's meaningful to the board and educational partners, and how this information will inform the LEA's continuous improvement process. Next slide, please. In preparing for the mid-year report, LEAs will need to review all of the metrics and all of the actions and budgeted expenditures included in each of the goals in the approved LCAP. You can see the related sections on the slide. Next slide, please. Our presentation this morning offers some considerations in planning for and presenting the available information that will provide an update about progress being made toward metrics in this year's LCAP, and an update on what is in place and the related cost for planned actions to date. LEAs may consider organizing staff to access sources of data for all the metrics in each LCAP goal. This will include multiple sources of data, such as data from the dashboard that is being released in December, data in CalPads and DataQuest, as well as data from local surveys and locally defined data. Similarly, LEAs may consider organizing staff with oversight responsibility for specific actions in the LCAP
How are you?
to collect and share what is in place to date. And this may include sharing actions that are just starting or sharing actions that maybe haven't begun yet. For example, it will be important to include principals in sharing information about specific actions because they may have key information about implementation to date for specific actions at school sites. Additionally, for reporting on mid-year expenditures for actions, it will be important to determine a mid-year point in time from which fiscal personnel can provide an update on expenditures to date for all actions in the approved plan. Next slide, please. So with these big ideas in mind, we ask you to consider this big frame of providing these two important pieces of information about the metrics and the actions and their expenditures. And you may be aware that a few years back, there was a mid-year update which required LEAs to provide information about the status of metrics, actions, and expenditures in their LCAP. At that time, we offered a concept of 3 buckets, which was shared with us and other county offices by our colleagues at the Riverside County Office of Education. So some of you may remember the visuals that you're seeing here. These buckets are offered to provide a strategy to visualize and organize information to reflect the mid-year status of the LCAP metrics and outcomes being measured in the LCAP. So the idea here is that when we reflect on metrics in this year's LCAP and consider what mid-year outcome data is available, we might think of the status of the outcomes for each of the metrics in the LCAP in 3 ways. For some metrics, the outcomes are unknown at the mid-year. We don't know what the outcome is yet. For other metrics, the outcomes are still in progress. And for other metrics, the outcomes that will be included in next year's LCAP are already known. We already have that data. So we'll take a closer look at each of the buckets in the following slides. This red bucket reflects metrics where the outcomes are unknown. As you know, there are some metrics where the outcomes aren't known or available by the mid-year point in time. For example, metrics aligned to local indicators might not be known at this point because 2023-24 updates might not have been started or completed yet. This might include data collection and self-reflection on implementation of state standards, or data collection and self-reflection on parent and family engagement metrics. Additionally, data collected from surveys, such as the surveys on student sense of safety and connectedness, may not have been given yet for the current school year, so the outcomes are unknown. On the next slide, we'll look at the gray bucket. And here, this slide represents metrics where the outcomes are still in progress. And so here we see some examples of metrics where the outcomes are being collected. They're still in progress. This may include attendance rates, chronic absenteeism rates, and local assessments rate results, which might include benchmark assessments or diagnostic assessments. It's important to remember that when we consider data that is still in progress, what gets reported is just a snapshot in time of data that is available for certain metrics for this mid-year report. Next slide, please. And here the pink bucket reflects those metrics in the LCAP where the outcomes that will be included in this year 3 outcome section are already known. So this could include data from Dashboard, CalPADS, DataQuest, or like local data systems. Some metrics with outcomes that are known at the mid-year can include, for example, the 23-24 Williams Act reports, such as the sufficiency report for access to standards-aligned instructional materials, or the facilities inspection tool ratings. Other data that is known is data from the December dashboard that will be available for specific metrics included in the LCAP, such as English learner progress and graduation rates. Also, data that is available now for CASP results for 2022-23 provides outcome data that can be reported in the LEA's presentation. Keep in mind that the examples provided for each of the 3 buckets are not comprehensive and highlight just a few examples of metrics. LEAs will need to present an update on all available mid-year outcome data related to all metrics identified in the 23-24 LCAP. So putting this together, our next slide offers a visual tool or format that may be helpful to gather information for your mid-year report. You might consider creating a chart with each goal's metrics, baseline, desired outcomes, and then adding 2 columns, one for the mid-year report and one for the status. This format could be part of the presentation, or it could be used as a tool when collecting the information and organizing for the presentation. You will see that, for example, sense of school connectedness for students. You'll see the baseline information included and the desired outcome for 23-24. In the 23-24 mid-year report, you'll see this is unavailable because at this point, this is not known because this survey has not, in this scenario, this survey will be administered in March 2024. We wanted to bring to your attention that some LEAs may be working with an outside provider, such as document tracking services. They may offer templates for your mid-year data collection and/or presentation. So you would need to check with them on what's available. All right, we'll take a look at the 3 buckets now in terms of implementation and expenditures. And considering these 3 buckets also offers a strategy to visualize and organize information that reflects the mid-year status of actions in the LCAP and their related expenditures to date, their mid-year expenditures to date. The descriptors identify phases of implementation, which include actions that have not started, actions that are in progress, and actions that have been completed. We'll take a look at each of these on the next few slides. Here we see the red bucket showing actions that have not started. As an LEA is preparing to share an update on the implementation of their actions, they may consider reporting on actions that have not started and providing context so educational partners and the board understand why these actions have not started. For example, some actions may not have been implemented yet due to staffing shortages and related vacancies. Additionally, some LEAs may have shifted priorities at the beginning of the school year based on their analysis of data. And so they may have reestablished their training priorities or sequence of activities for specific reasons. Another example might address professional development that was planned but has been delayed due to sub shortages or put off for implementation in the spring. There are a variety of reasons that may have delayed the implementation of planned actions. In cases where actions haven't started, the update provides an opportunity for the LEA to explain the anticipated timeline for actions that have not started so that the board and educational partners can have an understanding of the local context. Moving to the gray bucket, we see that the gray bucket represents actions that are in progress. For these actions, LEAs can provide a point-in-time update that will explain what has started and is currently in place. This may include, for example, that PD has started, but not all staff has had the opportunity to participate. And it may include the costs that have been incurred to date. Similarly, some staff may have been hired for a particular intervention program, and implementation is underway at multiple school sites, while recruitment is continuing to start the implementation at other school sites. And moving to the next slide, we take a look at implementation and expenditure of actions that are completed. This pink bucket represents actions that are completed. There may not be very many of these actions. However, you may have some actions that have been completed. For example, an action may be considered as completed since materials are in place and staffing and training for a specific program has been completed. Perhaps a parent training has been completed, or perhaps specific training sessions for a particular program has been completed. Because this is a mid-year point in time, an LEA will need to keep in mind that many actions may not be considered completed until the end of the school year, because they continue through the end of the school year. Next slide, please. So along with the mid-year update on implementation for all the actions in the LCAP, LEAs are also providing mid-year expenditure data. And the information reported to date will be year-to-date spending information and implementation data for all actions included in the 23-24 LCAP. LEAs will need to determine the mid-year data they use for collection of implementation and expenditure data that they're going to share in their presentation. Statute only defines the February 28th deadline for the presentation. It doesn't define the mid-year date. So some things to consider. When reporting mid-year expenditures, LEAs may consider aligning to first interim budget reporting, which would have been calculated by District Fiscal Services in November and reported to the board in December. Keeping in mind that second interim will report expenditures through January 31st, fiscal staff might not have time to complete calculations prior to the February 28th board presentation deadline. The key takeaway here is that for whatever mid-year date the LEA selects for their reporting date, it will be important for program and fiscal staff to connect so that data about mid-year expenditures and implementation data is consistent. Next slide, please. The next couple slides provide some formats for organizing and presenting your information. This table format offers action and expenditure information for each goal included in this year's LCAP. You'll notice that the budgeted information section notes the inclusion of the budget adopted with the adopted budget. Then the boxed section identifies the first interim budget as the point in time for reporting the expenditures to date. And in this organizer, the last column is where the LEA would include a description about their implementation to date. Again, whatever format the LEA develops for their presentation, the critical component is that the information provided is accessible and includes meaningful data so that educational partners and the board understand what is being presented and where services are in place and what the expenditures to date are for those services. The next slide provides another organizer. This offers a display of all actions for each LCAP goal organized by the status of mid-year implementation. Below the status row, LEAs could provide a description about the actions included at each level of implementation. For example, following the actions included in the red bucket, the LEA would provide a description about what has not started and the related local context. The LEA would determine the descriptions that would provide the local context about their level of implementation for all the actions in the goal, and the LEA would provide a fiscal update for the actions in each of the goals in this year's LCAP. So bringing this all together is a timeline, and it's important for LEAs to begin planning now for this mid-year presentation. The timeline offered on the slide provides a time frame for LEAs to collect available data on outcomes and implementation of actions and related expenditures. This timeline reflects November through January. And then in January, provides time to prepare the report so that it's ready for presentation at a regularly scheduled board meeting by the February 28th deadline. Next slide, please. And shifting gears and wrapping up this section today, I want to highlight the revised self-reflection tool for local indicator for state priority 6. You may have received communication from CDE last month that reminded LEAs that the state board approved changes to the local indicator self-reflection tool for school climate back in March. And the two key changes to the self-reflection tool address the frequency of the survey administrations for perceptions on sense of school safety and connectedness, and the disaggregation of survey responses by specific student groups. Beginning this year, LEAs must annually administer a local climate survey that captures measures of student perception of school safety and connectedness, and the surveys must allow disaggregation of data by student groups. And these student groups are the student groups identified in Education Code 52052. As you know, these include ethnic student groups, socioeconomically disadvantaged pupils, English learners, long-term English learners, pupils with disabilities, foster youth, and homeless youth. So it's important for LEAs to start planning now to be prepared to respond to this new self-reflection tool. Our assessment department has reached out to the Department of Education, who supports the California Healthy Kids Survey, and they confirmed that the Healthy Kids Survey has been modified to ensure that the results can be disaggregated. Many LEAs use locally defined surveys, so it will be important for those LEAs to determine how their system will code their surveys so that it allows for this disaggregation of all of the required student groups. So with that, that concludes the LCAP update for today, and I'm going to turn it over to Adrian for some additional reminders.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, we're a few minutes late, but let's just finish out the meeting. Again, we just have a few additional reminders before we end today's meeting. Next slide, thank you. We want to remind you that the Federal Cash Management Data Collection, also known as the CMTDC web reporting system, will close next Tuesday, October 31st at 11:59 p.m. And so again, please submit your cash balance data sooner than later, especially if you plan on going trick-or-treating on Tuesday. So again, make sure that you are aware and your fiscal folks are aware of this deadline. It's important for your allocations in December. We also would like to invite you to our 2-day Fiscal Basics workshop. Day 1 will be held in a couple of weeks on Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, and from 3 o'clock to 4:30. And then 2 weeks later, after the Thanksgiving holiday, on Wednesday, November 29th, from 3 to 4:30, we will hold day 2. Both workshops, again, 3 to 4:30, and the registration link is at the bottom of the slide. And we will also be shortly emailing to you shortly the flyer itself as well with the full information. Thank you again for joining us this morning. Please find this evaluation link for today's meeting. We really do read and appreciate the feedback that you provide us. And so again, if you could take the time to give us your feedback, we would greatly appreciate that. If you have any last minute questions, again, please place them in the chat, and we will provide you with the Q&A, and we'll email it to you, as well as we'll post it on our Canvas link. Here's our contact information. And again, we want to thank you and have a great rest of the day.